Recently, it was mentioned there could be as many as 17,000 possible endings in Baldur's Gate 3. That number comes from Crystal Ding, a writer for Baldur's Gate 3, and was first mentioned in Fetch Your Life's video. That is a staggering number and left some players asking how it's even possible and questioning if the game itself is too big. Well, now we have some clarification and some more context around that number, stemming from an interview with Baldur's Gate 3 lead writer Adam Smith. Ali Jones at Games Radar was able to get Smith to shed some light on that 17,000 endings number, as well as discuss how Baldur's Gate 3's story branches. I want to cover some highlights of that interview, and I'll link the full article in the description below. In the interview, Smith starts out going over his idea of what's not a branching narrative, or at least what isn't in Baldur's Gate 3. When most people think of a branching story, they think of starting the game at the bottom of a tree. As the game progresses, players start climbing up the tree, get to a limb, where they make a choice and branch one way or the other. They continue to do this until they reach the end of one branch at the top of the tree where the game ends. However, Smith mentions that's not how players should look at it. He says, "It's not that you start at point A, then keep branching and branching and branching. The problem with that would be that if I make a choice, then I branch over here, and suddenly I'm over here and I can't get back to the trunk." If stories were like that, players could make a choice and then be stuck without a way to get back to the main story. In Dungeons & Dragons, this is part of the fun, and a good dungeon master can work with this to guide players back to the main path, and the best ones can turn it into a completely new story. However, as much as Baldur's Gate 3 is like tabletop D&D, it's still a video game. So instead, Smith mentions the narrative of Baldur's Gate 3 is more like a spider web. He states, "The end of the game is the center, and the start of the game is the outer edge. So you're always heading towards the same point, and what happens when you get there is very different. But it interweaves, so you're kind of dancing between plots." This is a fascinating way to visualize the story of Baldur's Gate 3. Players will start at the edge of the web, making choices throughout the game, interweaving in this web, but always coming back to a more tailored path to ensure the player is never lost. In the latest panel from Hell, Larian gave an example of how this web works by showing gameplay of the same part of the story with different perspectives, based on different choices that were made earlier in the game. I won't dive into details here due to potential spoilers, but go check out the latest panel from Hell if you want to see it in action. Smith also gives an example of how Baldur's Gate 3's story and choices interact within the web, talking a little bit about a character you will meet in the game, Jaheira. Smith mentions that by default, she is pretty neutral and her morality is quite flexible. She's a good person, but she's willing to do bad things for the right outcomes. And at the very moment players meet her, you can be friendly because of the things you've done, you can be an enemy because of the things you've done, or you can be pretty much in the middle. Smith says, "And when we first started building that, the temptation was always that she judges you, but she doesn't, because she doesn't know what you've done in the past. And this is the big secret, right? People only know what you tell them. This invokes a sense of realism into the game. Characters will react to what they've heard or seen you do. They won't just automatically know what you've done." Baldur's Gate itself also has a way to alter the view of the player thanks to its in-game newspapers. Arrive in the city, and newspapers will already have stories building up your reputation based on the reporting of local journalists. But for much of the game, Smith mentions you can simply lie to people about the atrocities you may or may not have committed. Smith says his favorite way to play the game is pragmatic evil, where you find that you've managed to manipulate a lot of people and no one actually knows how bad you are. Coming back to the tree and web metaphors, in a branching story, Smith notes that sometimes it's challenging to get the players back on track. He gives an example of a character getting killed during combat that you didn't want them to be involved in. He mentions if they die, they're not available anymore. You can speak with their corpse, you can get some information from them, but they're just gone. Maybe you've never even got a chance to talk to them. I could see some players being upset that a major NPC can be killed, and with dice rolls could come down to luck. But the story will evolve from there and lead to different outcomes. This all helps with the immersion it seems like Larian is going for in this game. Speaking of the dice roll system and potential luck around that, Smith mentions one early playtest saw that happen with an essential NPC. 3 unfortunate critical hits meant that the character was wiped out before they can even be recruited. There are definite downsides to a situation like that, but again, Larian is going to let it happen and adjust the game accordingly. Smith goes on to say, "The game reacts. The game can let it happen. You can always pull yourself out of it and get back to the plot line. There are very few points in the game where you can be like, I don't know what to do next. We try to make sure you always have direction. Even if everything goes to hell or you decide to just kill everyone, you can pick up the thread and say, I'm going to do this next. This all comes back to the web metaphor that Smith used earlier in the interview. The goal of that is to keep players from getting lost and have a more tailored story where they always know what they need to do. With this, Smith's spiderweb metaphor means that those 17,000 endings won't actually make for thousands of different endgame states. It's the center of the web that serves as the end of the story, a point offering far less variation from a core narrative than the outer edges might. Smith goes on to mention the number of true endings will be in the very low double digits, with thousands of possible variations depending on how you make your way through the game. Smith makes it a point to say Baldur's Gate 3 is not a world that changes with every choice you make. What he does say is that the characters react to every choice you make. He states, "Everything you click will cause something to happen. Sometimes it's small, sometimes it's subtle, but it all means something from the very first clicks." So there we have a little more context around the 17,000 endings. In reality, we're going to be getting around 10 to 15 true endings, which is still an incredible number and encourages several playthroughs. This is all exciting news, and Baldur's Gate 3 is shaping up to be a truly unique RPG. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.